Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures podcast. This is a very special episode. In previous conversations, we talk a lot about different aspects of venture building and venture investing, and this is arguably the most important episode that we have done on this show because we talk about human-to-human interaction, communication, and bias, and racism, and sexism, and ableism, and ageism, and all of the different isms that, in my opinion, are not only fundamentally important to become aware of, to become a better human, for those of us that are on this journey to become better humans, but it's also fundamentally important when venture building, when venture investing, to think about how to actually create products and services that benefit the world. So Lindsey, her group is lthjglobal.com. And in this episode, we dive into a number of different conversations that get very personal, that get very into the details of what anti-racism is, what anti-oppression is, why exposing ourselves to the biases that we all have is important for us to build better organizations, to build better communities, to love ourselves better and give ourselves freedom to be on this journey, to fail fast. And we have a lot of conversation about what all of that means and how to go about thinking about practicing it. And I would invite you to join me in this journey as well. So if you're listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. There I'll have more extensive show notes and links to the different things that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. So with that, please enjoy this very important conversation with Lindsey T. Jackson. All right, Lindsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. How are you?
I am excited on a variety of different levels. I think excited is the right word, to have this conversation and share it with friends, family, those that I know, those that I may not know, who are following, who are just interested in general venture building, venture investing conversations. And it's been a delight. It's been an amazing journey to get to know you last year and a half or so. And I'm so incredibly impressed by your work. It has profoundly moved me as a human, impacted the work that I do, how I think about relating to humans, investing in entrepreneurs, running a company, growing a company, advising others on how they grow their companies. And this is a treat to be able to share this conversation with the audience. So if you wouldn't mind, just tell us about what's on your mind, what you do, a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. My name is Lindsey T. Jackson, and I'm the founder and have the honor of serving in the role as CEO at LTHJ Global. I'm the daughter of Deborah Holland and Jeffrey Jackson, who both came, one from the north and one from the south, and met in a wonderful city called Pittsburgh. Only people who have never been to Pittsburgh don't think Pittsburgh is great. It's great. And I'm an artist. I have this small amount of time that I get to be perhaps the lead mentor in the lives of two children who came in through me into this world. We call this a mother. And I do anti-racism work, which is why I end up on a lot of podcasts. Yeah. Yeah. So I think in terms of the work that you do and what the future of venture capitalism will be, entrepreneurship, I think it's a good time to be talking about what does it mean to build anti-racist organizations.
Mm, mm. I wholeheartedly agree. So
Yeah.
let's maybe start, if you agree, with what is anti-racism?
Mm. Well, I think for those who've already read Ibram Kendi's work, uh, 3 years ago now, in our collective consciousness, we started really using this language more. It's not just enough to be, I'm not a racist. You have to actively engage in a practice around anti racism. And there's a lot to break down there. So I'm just going to work around my mind palace. One, I'm a child of the 80s, meaning that I grew up, my two great loves were somewhere between Fraggle Rock and Prince. Um, Lots of similarities there if you really pick that apart. And children of the 80s, a lot of us relate to this language around uh, I don't see color, was what we were taught to say, what we
Mm,
were taught
mm.
to think. And the reality is, you do see color. Or often when somebody says this to me, I'll respond with, "So, are you saying that you're colorblind?" Which is a very real um, way of moving through the world. It is often considered a condition. Although, when I've spoken with people who live with color blindness, they will tell you about all of the benefits of that existence, which is
Mm,
beautiful.
mm.
But so when we say I'm colorblind, what we're really trying to say is I'm trying not to perceive all of the ways that race and oppression impact multiple people in varied ways. And so the work of anti racism is to cast off this false narrative around I'm colorblind. I do not see the varied impacts of oppression on different people's lives, different people's bodies, different people's existence, and instead begin to attend to a practice of what we call unlearning racism,
Mm.
which is a every minute, every hour, everyday practice of, to use your language at Proda, of what does it really mean to flourish as a human, and then to give that gift to someone else.
So in my own journey, the the stories that I remember growing up, that started giving me clues that my own bias, my own lenses, my own perspective by which growing up in America, growing up in Navy Town, America, with a family of four other siblings and lots of activity and lots of sports, sort of an environment where we um, extremely active with everything you can think of, and parents that supported us in in uh, in all of those activities. But one thing I do remember very distinctly from my childhood, because we were a Mormon family until probably the mid '80s. My mom couldn't handle it. It was very amazingly left the Mormon church, and that's a whole nother story. But I do remember distinctly my father not at all being interested in joining the Mormon church, especially because they did not allow people with larger amounts of melanin in their skin to be members of this community, apparently until the early 80s, which
Hmm.
really bothered him. And there was a lot of stories in his life and his own anti-racism journey that I think he instilled in us as a family growing up, which I very much appreciate. And then in the late 90s, The Matrix comes out. And we realize, whoa, okay, this perception of reality, this what we think is real, how we taste and perceive reality, there might be something different here.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, what got you into this work? What started the journey into now helping organizations with anti-racism work?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people would assume, oh, you're a Black woman, and therefore you would want to do DEI work. And I think the exact opposite is true.
Mm,
As a Black woman, doing this work, if you can do anything else in the world besides be a DEI consultant or educator, do that thing. If you can choose any other existence and be happy and fulfilled, I would encourage you to do that thing. But this work, um, for lack of a better word, it is an art that beckons me, that calls me when other people are going to sleep, thinking of sugar plum fairies. Perhaps I'm thinking about my students and what the next place for one student in one of my classes, what the next lesson I need to teach them on their anti-racism or anti-oppression journey. And so, in some ways, I would say this work found me
mm,
and I gave into it. I started my life as a contemporary dancer, and um, the through line there, I believe, is that I'm a storyteller and I'm constantly looking for different stories to tell. And as I have lived across 4 different continents, collecting stories and retelling those stories, and as a researcher, synthesizing those stories into learnings for myself and that can be shared out, uh, this work of um, organizational healing is really about helping people collect the stories within their organizations and learn from them, which is really so funny when I'm sitting with a room full of business owners or founders, CEO, venture capitalists, and somehow they think that this work is a side aspect
mm,
to the work that they are doing. And there's a lot there in terms of trauma, privilege, uh, a scarcity mindset, the fear of these topics. But this work should be really exciting to anybody that considers themselves to be an entrepreneur or anybody that considers themselves to be excited in building ventures, because your job is to collect data, interpret the insights, learn from them, and apply that knowledge. That is the startup kind of manifesto, right? And so if there's data out there that would suggest we may be limiting the talents of the people on our team, and there's an ability to collect that data, learn from it, and apply it so that people can work better, safer, and smarter. I don't understand how how people don't don't want that data and are not exceedingly excited about that data.
mm,
But that's just my opinion.
mm. I like that. I mean, in my own journey, I came from graduate work in a laboratory, bioengineering laboratory, and our whole life was data. Our whole life was designing experiments to be able to hopefully gather data in a way that would teach us something. And my research advisor, Dr. Viola Vogel, she was just an incredible person, an amazing guide and mentor for me in the 2000s or late 90s and in the 2000s, as I'm in her laboratory. And she taught us to always strive to tell a story, to craft your experiment such that no matter what data you receive, you're going to learn something interesting. And of the many things that I've passed on later, as I've gotten into entrepreneurship and building companies and helping people build companies, that is one of many lessons from Dr. Vogel that I have passed on to entrepreneurs building, because asking the right questions, designing the experiments, and then listening very carefully to that data is of utmost importance in all things. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that this topic about being an anti-racist organization, about being an organization that is interested in removing oppression of all kinds, of being aware of bias of all kinds, to enable the flourishing of your people and your business, and hopefully the customers and users of whatever you're building, to be able to become who they are, is so unbelievably important.
Yes.
And to become increasingly aware of all of these systems of oppression and bias that exist that prevent people from flourishing, that's a journey I am on, and I'm honored to have you in my life to provide input, to provide reflection, to provide prompts and questions, and others in our community that do the same to encourage us in our journeys. I couldn't be it's very difficult to put words to how important this is for us as people and for us as those leading businesses. It touches so many different aspects of life. And
absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things, and you mentioned it when you were speaking about the matrix, and a lot of my students, the matrix is one that they refer to often as they start to learn about the attributes of our dominant cultural norms. They go, oh, like the matrix? Yeah, it's like the matrix. And the thing is, as leaders or those who desire to have the title of leader or of serving in the role of CEO or ED, whatever, the next question you have to ask yourself is, why is it that some of the data I don't want to see?
Mm, mm,
It's the same question as VCs. If we were speaking to a leader of a company, one of our, portfolio companies, and we were saying, hey, the data is saying the market doesn't want this, or the data is leading to this new kind of pivot that we need to take for this company. And if I'm sitting there going, la 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 la, I don't want to hear it, then we would sit that founder down and we would say, why are you afraid of what the data is showing you? And so it's the exact same thing. At some point, we have to look inside and ask ourselves, why am I afraid to talk about racism? Why am I afraid to talk about homophobia and transphobia and alloyism and anti-Semitism and on and on and on?
mm,
If I'm afraid to talk about something that the data is there in front of us saying we have a problem here to solve, then the problem is not the data, the problem is me. At some point, we have to be brave enough to do that type of self-reflection and say, what am I holding on to here? What am I afraid to give up here? Dr. Cornel West refers to it as the death of the ego. If you want to do this work, if you really want to live your values, you have to be prepared to suffer that first death, which is the egoic death, the privilege that we have used to block out any data, any stories that do not align with our worldview, and with the privilege that we have to ignore these stories. And yet, I'm always surprised when I'm sitting across from a leader or somebody who wants to be a leader of leaders, and they do not value the stories of the people that they want to lead.
Hmm.
They're focused on the company and the product, but companies that make great products are made up of people. And if you want to make great products, you need to unlock the greatness in each person within your company. And so that gap, I think just now we're starting to see in the venture space that more and more people are really starting to think about how do we unlock, how do we remove barriers for those founders, for those leaders, for the people within the companies within our portfolio. And when we do that, the future is bright, right? The data is there to say that companies that leverage diversity have better returns. They make better products. They move faster. They're more agile. And so the only place that we're left in is that some leaders, some VCs, some entrepreneurs, they're scared to do the work. They're scared to get on the journey of unlearning racism. And some of that is what we've been taught in our society. The fear has been taught. But that is a personal journey to go on and to delve into.
I like the word unlearning because it's true. We have learned, if I think about my life in the 80s and 90s, with the exception of some amazing influences like my father that I spoke of, most of the learning was was racism. It's both a form of ethnocentrism. Hey, we're all just, but in an extreme ethnocentrism, it leads to a positioning of other, and it leads to thinking our dominant cultural norms, our cultural norms, because of the way that I look and the way that I've been learned, the way that I've been educated directly and indirectly, has been in this culture that have set up dominant cultural norms, which for many people, that's not their culture. And for many people, it is oppressive. And for many people who look differently, have different race identities, it is racist.
Yeah.
And that, for me personally, here as a multi-year, multi-decade journey to embrace that. And I think this is a really difficult conversation to have with people. When I hear language, when I see racism and different forms of ableism, saneism, ageism, sexism, all the isms, it becomes very difficult to talk about it.
Yeah.
And even those that are listening may have kind of very little idea where we're even going here. And so my question to you is, in the work that you do, or even the conversations that you have with people you meet in life, how do you even start this conversation without becoming the type of archetype that everybody attacking straw, like the false narrative that I see a lot of people in different sides of this conversation attacking, because there's so much nuance that's lost. And I've been impressed by the way you talk about this, and I'm curious if there's a formula or a position or a posture or a way that you think about approaching this conversation with people.
Yeah, I think what you said there, even that language right there, I spend my days having conversations with people. And I am also on an anti-oppression journey. I am cis, meaning I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth. There's privilege in that.
Mm.
I am in a very fat shaming culture. Sizeism
Mm.
is a very real ism. I present as aligned with our current standards around American beauty.
Mm.
There's a privilege in that. I grew up in an upper middle class family in a very classist society. There's
Mm.
a privilege in that. And so I'm also on a journey of constant unlearning. I have a personal experience of racism as a Black woman.
Mm.
I have a personal experience of patriarchy and misogyny culture as a woman. Those are journeys that I'm healing from. I'm healing from the impact, the detriment of that on my daily existence. And so, in the work that we do, there's a lot of meeting people in their trauma. And when we're enacting racism, when we're enacting homophobia and transphobia on others, it is a result of our own trauma. In my book, Unlearning Racism, which is due out in September, one of the first things that we unpack is that hurting people, people who are hurting, hurt others.
Mm.
It is not a natural human design to desire hurting people for no reason. And so the impact of our own hurt, we all in a system of oppression, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, when one is oppressed, all is oppressed. Really
Mm-hmm.
think about that for a moment. When
Mm.
one is oppressed, all are oppressed. No matter where you have been told that you sit on that privilege spectrum within our society, you're still oppressed. The benefit of that privilege also comes at a cost. And so every conversation that I go into is with that in mind. I'm sitting across from a human, and how much trauma is present here. The more vehement they are in their uh, rejection of this work, often correlates to the amount of trauma they've experienced in their life.
Mm.
And so once we start to ascertain that, once we in relationship, me and the student, me and someone I met on a park bench while my kids were playing, once we ascertain that, then the conversation becomes very different. We're no longer talking about sound bites in a media frenzied society. We're talking about two humans traveling through this world trying to make meaning. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. I recently had a colleague call me in. I've loved learning this from you. Instead of calling me out, calling me in, inviting me into relationship with her as a fellow human. When I kept referring to underrepresentation, certain people are underrepresented in venture building and venture investing. While true, she correctly pointed out to me, hey, Will, not only are they underrepresented, but they've just been flat out excluded. There's been real oppression that is a combination of direct, indirect, conscious, unconscious, exclusion from venture building and venture investing. And the statistics are ridiculous. It's really, really, really bad. It's so shockingly bad that
Yes. We laugh so we don't cry.
yeah, that's right. No, it evokes anger.
Mm.
It evokes anger and evokes reflection about what am I doing? What have I been doing historically? And to contribute to that, to the dismal numbers of representation that, from, as my colleague pointed out, that have actually been because of racism. Again, we laugh because we're covering out how horrifying this is. Because of racism, the representation numbers are dismally bad. And if I reflect on what have I done the last few decades that may have participated in those numbers, it makes me think about how and why anti-racism work is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we often run just a thought experiment with business owners, with those managing portfolios, which is really just do a count in a given day. How many people do you engage with who are outside of your intersectional identity? So let me unpack that language. The intersections of my identity are Black, and we use this language Black in that as an American who my ancestry would have suffered through chattel slavery. And so I don't know where my people come from. I don't know where I am indigenous to. And so Black is the language that we use to capture this gross loss of identity and land.
Mm.
And so I am Black, I am woman, I am a mother. These are all intersections of my identity that play out. And so if you are moving through a given day and the bulk, if not all, of the people that you engage with have the same intersectional identity as you, then you are not living most likely your values. Because one, in order to live your values, you must be in practice. Another way might be to say you're testing. If you're always in a safe little box and container, there's no opportunity to test my values in relationship to the world, in relationship to another. I'm always amazed when entrepreneurs find themselves always keeping the same company. If you claim to be an entrepreneur and you're always in the same company, you're not going to make great products for people. Because people are by nature diverse.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make great products for one set of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that small set of people also are extremely diverse. There's no monolith. And so when we're talking about venture building and looking at what was 0.03% investment, for example, in Black female founders, and now is down to 0.02%, which is boggling in terms of the number of businesses that Black women start per year. But I often ask VCs, who do you spend your time with? If everybody looks like you, if everybody thinks like you, if everybody's moving through the same world like you, you're missing out on, whoa, so much opportunity.
Big time.
Yeah. But we also have not taught a lot of people, and especially if you grew up, again, 80s and before, how do we work across difference? This is one of the first things that when we're working in organizations, we are teaching leaders how to work across difference. They have been given absolutely no skills to work across difference. We focus so much within our schools around math and science and reading, and we've got these benchmarks and all of these tests that we're working towards in order to demonstrate this type of competence. But this really important competence that's really kind of important for a functioning society, which is how do we work and collaborate across difference? How do we problem solve when my worldview is in direct conflict with another person's worldview? How do we do conflict resolution? How do we compromise? I'm always asking, why are we not testing and grading on this just as aggressively as we are on fractions.
100%. I'm so with you. Yeah.
Feels rather important. But
Right.
that's just me.
Yeah.
But then we're 100% surprised when we hear stories about leaders throwing chairs across the room at their, team members, or screaming down the hall, or any numbered of very just outlandish types of human engagement, especially with the inherent power dynamic of leader over individuals. We consider ourselves surprised. Oh, I would never. Well, no, you might never throw a chair down the hall, I wonder, but you might never. But what are the subtle, little nuanced ways
Right.
that you are also hampering individuals within your organization based on race, based on class, based on gender, based on sexual orientation or identity? Most people don't even think about cognitive diversity, which, if you're not thinking about cognitive diversity every time you're in a room with more than 2, 3 people, again, you've lost an aspect of greatness that
Mm,
could have been tapped into.
mm-hmm.
Oh, now you got me nerding out, Will. I'm excited and fired up.
Okay. So people listening to this are now, like many who I'd imagine listen to you for more than 5 seconds, ask the question, now
How
what?
did a dancer become an entrepreneur? That's
What,
often
what do I
the
do? Like I'm building businesses, I'm investing in businesses. Yeah. Okay. Guilty. I'm maybe just hanging out with, I mean, I was guilty of this until probably a couple years ago when I began a very deliberate anti-racism approach to our work. But in the mid 2010s, without thinking about it, the work I was doing and the people I was working with were just the people that looked and talked and had a cultural affiliation that was similar to me. And it wasn't actually it was actually data as to the success of businesses that had all forms of diversity in their board and their executive team, and then thus their entire company, that actually could retain all
Yeah,
kinds of different talent, that those companies were outperforming other companies. Not only is it
100%.
important from a basic human social justice issue, but even from a purely capitalistic angle, these businesses are better to create and they're better to invest in.
Yes.
That was an awakening moment for me in the mid to late 2010s. And so anyway, for people that are listening, think, what do I do? How do I think about this? What steps should I take? Obviously, everybody's different, and you have the beautiful one-on-one conversations. But for those who are listening or watching, wondering, okay, now what? What do I do next? How would you start that, even to just a general audience that we may not see on the other side of this screen, or these earbuds, or however people are consuming the content?
Yeah. Out walking their dog. Um, I'm going to give you 3 things to do, which really is the basis of all of our work. And, I'm trying to keep this company running and my household running and getting this book out for you all in September. But one, you need to find a language, a practice that constantly invites you to interrogate yourself
Mm,
and the way you view the world. We use a tool called the Enneagram. I know at Proda, a lot of people relate to the language of the Enneagram, but the hole that we're trying to hammer here, the problem that we're trying to solve, is my way of viewing the world is only one
mm,
of a plethora of ways of viewing the world. When you really understand that core principle, what you are beginning is that egoic death.
mm,
My version of the truth is by nature limited because it is mine.
mm,
It is mine, and that's okay. And it is limited, and that's okay.
mm,
And
mm,
so, therefore, the only way that one can perceive truth is in relationship to another. A new truth is created. So I don't care what tool you use, whether it's the Enneagram or whatever, I can turn a screwdriver upside down and use the blunt end to hammer in a nail. Just find a tool. What is that tool? For some people, it's prayer. For some people, it's supplication. For some people, it is astronomy, astrology, whatever it is. Find a tool that helps you daily, hourly, every minute interrogate what is my version of the truth and what might be this person's version of the truth, and in what ways am I stuck in patterns, so that you can free yourself from those patterns. The second thing is begin to really understand this core lesson. Grab your pen. Oh, some of you are out walking your dogs. Okay, come back. You'll listen to this again. This core lesson, which is that belonging and connection is not defined by who you exclude. Okay, let that marinate for a second. Belonging and connection is not defined by who you exclude or is excluded. And this is a revolutionary thought if you grew up in Western dominant cultural norms, both within your organization, both if you're sitting at a board table right now and you're looking at everybody around that table, if you're in your church this weekend, your belonging and connection is not defined by who has been excluded, which means that you need to expand. You need to be constantly expansive in order to really feel what belonging and connection would be, to really feel what love would be. If you can imbue that idea within your organization, within your family, within yourself, all of a sudden you become less scared of relating to other people. Will, I've heard you use in some of your other podcasts this questioning I see you do around, is the core human condition to break into these small tribes and factions? I think historically we can say that there was an element of that. There was a time when that was necessary. There was scarcity of resources, and so there was a necessity to that. I could also point to research that alludes to why patriarchy and some of the attributes of that made sense. We're a very useless baby, unlike other animals. If I was a giraffe, I'd be up walking in like 4 hours. Human babies are so useless for a very long time. It's very strange. And therefore, from a scientific standpoint, I can say I understand how patriarchal culture developed. Is it still necessary? No. Same with this idea of these factions, these tribes that exclude. Is it still necessary? No. Do we have the brain capacity to move past that? Absolutely. We have a plastic brain. I'm pretty sure you did an episode on that later. You can reference it in the notes. The third thing is embrace a practice that looks like this: fail, fail again, fail faster. And this should make sense in a room of entrepreneurs and VCs and thought leaders. Fail, fail again, fail faster. It is exactly the same practice of entrepreneurship and venture building that you should be applying to your anti-racism and anti-oppression work. You must fail, but try again, fail faster. Pivot, learn, grow, heal, develop. And therein lies the sweet fruit. And I think in watching you on your journey, Will, it was when you realized that perfection was a fool's errand, but rather you started giving yourself more permission to fail, try again, fail again, try again, fail faster.
I
If you
love
can
that.
do those three things, it's that easy and that hard.
So to recap, even for my own learning, it's number one, develop a tool, a worldview, a practice such that you can be self-reflective enough to understand the biases that you're in, the perspectives that you have, whether it's Enneagram or some other tool, some kind of language, practice, worldview, to have both that self-reflection and the ability to practice that reflection
Mhm.
regularly.
Regularly.
Number two, our community and who we hang out with and who we are as a group is not defined by who we exclude. That's actually that is worth taking a weekend retreat, a week retreat, a year retreat to ponder that one, because it's so profoundly huge, important, and convicting for anyone taking more than 3 seconds to think about that one. And then three, I love bringing in the venture building, venture investing, the lean startup, the fail fast into this work, because yes, it feels, even in Jim Collins' flywheel language of building your economic engine so your business gets going faster and faster and faster, your anti-racism journey can be thought of similarly. Fail, 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 fail. Oh, because I can point, even if I think through a plot of how I've failed as a human to effectively help others help others flourish. The plots, the points in my life were very spaced out. And then in the last 4 years have now become exponentially more, more stories of, oh, I failed and learned. Oh, I failed and recognized. Oh, I failed and see that. I was saying these things. I was practicing these things. I was hanging out with these people. I was unconsciously doing these actions. And I'm seeing that flywheel speed up now. And I'm in media and in podcasts and in books and in conversations with people and in late night conversations or Zoom conversations. I'm seeing it everywhere now, for maybe people that are perhaps at this place like me, and we are frustrated by lots of racism, sexism, ableism, Satanism, oppression, different aspects of our culture that are oppressive to people. And we now, because we've been thinking about this and practicing it for quite some time, doing our best to follow your three, which is a beautiful way to frame it. I am, and people like me, I know, are very angry and frustrated and upset and don't know how to talk about this. Don't know how to lovingly call people in it, more than just a one-on-one conversation. Maybe that's it. I don't know. How do you, what would be your advice to people who are maybe in their journey and are now are failing fast, growing, trying to rid the shackles? Well, that's got all kinds of meaning. I gotta be careful with that language. I'll think about that. That are trying to be better.
Yeah.
How do you? Yeah. How would you think about that one?
The answer is in the question, in that it is a sign that somebody still has more trauma of their own to deal with if they're judging people who are early on the journey, right? Because you've clearly forgotten the journey that you went on to get to where you are in your new age of enlightenment. And if you're looking back down the road, judging those who are early on the journey, that's often when we would say, yep, now you need to go back and hold hands with them and start your journey again, because you must have missed one of the lessons. I once read somebody, all the ills of social media and yet all the joys of social media. I don't know the author, but she said, dear white people or white bodied people, as it pertains to racism, this is your work to go get your people. And do not forget all of the people who were patient and kind with you in getting you to where you are now. And so in this work, if I am a white-bodied individual and would have to have an entire another class or podcast on when we use the term white and how that is in response to our dominant cultural norms. But if I'm a white-bodied individual, it is my work to get my people in racism. As a cisgendered individual, it is my work to get my people as it pertains to justice and reform for LGBTQIA plus plus reform and consciousness. It is not our job with our privilege to take on the rage and the pain of those who have been at the end of that oppression. And so sometimes I'll see these social justice warriors out here, and it seems in listening to them as though they have directly experienced racism. No, I've directly experienced racism. From the age of 5, the research shows that Black children, Black and brown children, begin experiencing instances of racism 5 times a day. And then it increases as you get older. Luckily, I own my own company, so I don't have to experience that at work. But the thing about that is it is not the work of an ally or an accomplice to take on the rage and therefore move to saviorism, as though they have experienced that ism themselves. They should be the most patient with those who experience that side of privilege and moving their people forward. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so an indication, people often want to know, how do I know that I'm moving forward? How do I know that I'm advancing? And just to give an example, one of the things that when we're tracking a person's individual journey, and I'm pointing it out because you were just doing it, is when they start being able to name the times that they failed in the work, which you shared an anecdote of being called in, right? And you were able to share that. It was a story of failing. It was a story of growth, and you shared it without shame, right? That's one. The other is when we start calling ourselves in, which is you used a word, you paused, you thought about it, and you said, oh, I'm going to go do my own homework. That is part of that progression that we see. It's where you stop needing the oppressed to call you in. You stop needing the oppressed to invite you back to your values. It is when the practice becomes your own and you are doing it because you are trying to close the gap between your values and how you actually show up in the world. As that gap gets smaller and smaller, that is an indication that you have done enough of your own healing work to really authentically now be unlearning racism.
That is so good. Thank you for sharing that with us. There is so many different avenues we could now go, but I think this is probably a good place to wrap up part 1 of our conversation. Because we have introduced so many different topics that are simultaneously deeply personal, affecting our communities at different scales, including our entire world, preventing people from flourishing, opportunities to help people flourish. And for this, the name of this podcast is Ventures. And for those creating and investing in ventures, that I would invite the listener and the viewer to consider a venture of anti-racism work in your own life, with
Mm.
the journey that will take you on as a grand adventure that may actually help how you perceive yourself, how you perceive others. I'm right in the thick of it, and enjoy being in a community that allows failure and allows and celebrates the acceleration of that failure to learn, and therefore unlearn everything that has been put into our brains and minds and practice in the previous decades. And that experience of unlearning and learning new is joyful, is freeing, it hits at something that we don't often get to talk about or get to experience in our hyper-connected social media-ism world. And yes.
Anybody that considers themselves an entrepreneur or a VC, I posit by nature, because entrepreneurship is definitely a condition. I know that people are starting to study it. They are by nature well poised to unlearn racism. When they understand what I've just said, wow, the possibility.
Yeah. So can I point people to your work, your firm, your LinkedIn? What is the best place for people who want to continue the conversation with you and your group? Lindsey,
Yeah.
what is the best way to do that?
You can always reach out to me via a lot of things, Lindsey T. Jackson, for a park bench conversation, bring coffee. But I've been trained to say, you can find us at LTHJ Global, L for Lindsey, T for Tara, H for Holland, J for Jackson Global.com. And I think this February, I'm meant to be reading excerpts from my new book at our upcoming Leadership Roundtable as we begin the unlearning around Black History Month. And I'm doing a lot of speaking around town. So if you haven't booked your speakers for Black History Month or Women's Month, also allowing that you don't have to just bring Black people and women in during those 2 months. See what I did there? You can reach out to bring a conversation to somewhere near you. And we are one of the newest Proto Ventures. So look out for a new venture coming to you soon.
Yes. Couldn't be more excited about that one. We will share more of that soon. I will put the links in the show notes to everything that Lindsey just said. And I am anticipating with joy future conversation on these topics. Thank you, Lindsey, for your time.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing this space with us.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.